Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. I think we're live. Looks like we're live. I've been looking forward to this webinar for a long time. If you follow me on LinkedIn, you probably know that. I have worked in the insight space for almost 10 years, most of that time working with insights teams that are trying to share, trying to distribute, trying to make an impact with their data. So when the idea, actually, when the possibility of doing a webinar like this came up, I jumped all over it. I'm really excited to share some of these key insights with you guys, insights about sharing insights. I have, actually, I'm going to introduce you, Casey, on the next slide, but I'm going to give it just a few minutes of intro, maybe just a few seconds, actually, to let everybody kind of join. You can stream this on LinkedIn, YouTube. I think it might be on Twitter as well. We have a few people on site here at Question Pro to address any questions you might have during the feed. So please leave any of your questions in just the comment feed at whatever channel or whatever venue you're viewing this on. But really excited to see everybody here. Again, please leave any questions. If you can't hear me, let us know. We'll fix it. But anyways, my name is Nick Freiling. I'm the director of Insights Hub at Question Pro. Insights Hub is an insights repository. It's a knowledge base. It's a project manager specifically built for insights. Like I said, I spent most of my the past 10 years working with insights teams actually at an agency where we would field projects and then hopefully help these teams to take that quantitative data about their market, about their consumers, and then turn it into something that makes an impact with their decision makers, with their clients, with consumers, with whoever it is. When the possibility of this webinar came up, I jumped all over it and I knew exactly who I wanted to have on it with me, which is Casey Meehan, who is, you should see him on your screen. Let me just jump the slide here. So I'll let you introduce yourself a little more, Casey, but I just want to say real quickly, Casey's the CEO of Epic Presence. I love the name of that agency. I don't know if you call it an agency, but it's epic. It really is epic. Some of the numbers you've told me about, they're pretty epic too. So if you want to share some of that, a little bit about your background, kind of in the marketing space.
You bet. So for sure. Thanks for having me on, Nick. It's an exciting topic for me as well. A little bit about my background. I kind of started in the SEO world like a long time ago, 20 plus years ago now, and then quickly evolved more into content. So I've been running Epic Presence. We're a content marketing agency for about 10 years, specifically writing, in-depth, long-form articles, primarily in the software and technology space on behalf of all sorts of software companies from, small to the very large. And my writing staff was always sort of bottlenecked by the, information that they could just find online. And so for many years, I was racking my brain against how can we actually infuse all of what we're creating with insights, with research, with data. And that's when I guess I met you, Nick. It's been at least 5 or 6 paths of new information to whatever industries that we're working in. We did a few test projects just for ourselves, and then our biggest client, Salesforce.com, was the first one to jump on board. So it was a little bit kind of exciting there that it was a fairly large organization taking us up on kind of our beta research projects there. So we did a lot of work with them in and through COVID, and we can kind of reference some of that work, I guess, as we're going through this a little bit. But that's kind of our story. And now, we like to infuse data in everything that we do, or as much as we can. But getting kind of the leadership, not only their buy-in, but their understanding of what's possible versus what's impossible versus what will really potentially serve their needs. That's always a little bit of a juggling act, and I know that that's probably something we're going to dive into a little bit here today. So
yeah,
that about sums it up. Anything I missed there?
I don't think so. Yeah, I've always been kind of impressed with where you guys have taken data, which, as you know, can be pretty dry, and turn it into something you said drives a lot of traffic for Salesforce of all people. It's a big brand. But yeah, taking data and telling a story is an art, and it's not something that comes naturally, at least to most of the researchers I've worked with. I know you talk about your team as writers. I kind of have a writing background myself before I was in the insight space, and it helps a lot because you really have to tell a story. Data does not speak for itself. So that leads us to our
Sure.
next slide here. The problem I saw working with the teams that I've worked with over the years, which, like, not exaggerating, hundreds and hundreds of insights teams, is they get too caught up with data, tables, graphs, visualizations, and then they expect those things to speak for themselves. Now, the fact is, like, when you're on a quant team, I've been on a quant team, you can find something in a survey that's just like, this is amazing, it's revolutionary. Like, you know, you can say, maybe you go to your exec team and say, like, without a doubt, we can raise our prices like, 9%, and it's not going to affect, our margins, or it's going to boost the margins, but it's going to be a good thing. We've done so much research, it's clear and obvious. Look at this slide deck with like 60 formula, on it, a lot of visuals, a lot of crosstabs, a lot of numbers and figures. A quant researcher might look at that and say, yes, I mean, this is clear and obvious. The exec team, it depends on who they are, but it's not always so obvious to them. You have to tell a story. Obvious, or definitely when you're trying to reach like mass market consumers, like you guys do at Epic Presence with some of your work, like for Salesforce. I think you said some of that was like, it was on their blog. It wasn't like presenting to executives, but still on executives, you have to be, as an insights team, your own biggest advocate. And we'll get into that in a minute. My next slide here, this is from a movie, which hopefully, or maybe most of you guys know, Field of Dreams. There's a big famous quote in that movie. I don't really know why it's so famous, but it's, if you build it, they will come. He's told that by like the ghost of, I don't know, it's like Babe Ruth or something. He's like an Iowa farmer. He says, if you just build a stadium, they will come. I don't even know if he knew who they was supposed to be. But anyways, he builds, as a spoiler alert, he builds the stadium out in his field, and they come, they show up. It's like all the great baseball players of history or something like that. I don't actually remember. It's been a long time since I've seen this movie, but that line's like really iconic. If you build it, they will come. I have this laughing emoji here. I wish I could make it like 10 times bigger, because I've worked in the insight space long enough to know, like, if you generate a report, it doesn't matter how good it is, how valid it is. Just because you did it doesn't mean anybody is going to care. It doesn't mean anybody's going to care. Like, maybe your insights director or manager is going to care. You have to present that to people that have the decision-making power to do something with that data. And that's usually not the insights director. It's usually not your coworker on your quant team. It's usually somebody that does not have a background in looking at the kind of data that you're presenting to them. And so you have to do more than just build it. This is false. I mean, there's a reason why he's standing alone in the middle of a cornfield, because this is what will happen if you just build it. You're just going to be standing alone. Might as well be in the middle of a cornfield. Nobody's going to care. So next slide here is, like it or not, insights teams have to become their own biggest advocates. Like I said, this is it's never really been truer, I think, than now. And funny enough, that's because of all the new tech in insights. Like, data is just ubiquitous. You can run a study at Question Pro with our audience team and get data back like within 15, 30 minutes on a big survey. You can build it that quickly. You can field it that quickly, analyze the data. It happens in real time. So there's just like data everywhere. And it makes it easier to like gather the data, analyze it. But when that happens and this data is just everywhere, it just gets lost in the mix. You have to really become a storyteller on an insights team as an insights professional, not just because you care about your brand, brand success using the data that you've gathered, but also like to protect your own job, to make sure your own teams are getting rewarded or getting the visibility that they need, that they deserve for the work that they're doing. If they have discovered, like I said, that you can raise your product's prices by 9% tomorrow, and it's going to be a huge boon to your bottom line, your execs need to know that. They need to know that you're the one who figured that out, and they need to implement that so that you get reap the benefits of that. I have too many friends over the past that have got laid off from different organizations, sometimes for whatever reason, like UX, UI teams. They kind of struggle, when times are tough. And I think a lot of that has to do with that the impact they're making doesn't really get the reward or the visibility that it should. And a lot of that just has to do with the way you do or don't share your insights. So what we're going to present today is I call it the Insights Hub and Spoke Content Strategy. Now, I came up with that name, but the idea is not original to me. If you've ever heard of Gary Vaynerchuk, he's like the king of content. He was, I think he still is kind of the king of content online. And BuzzFeed, which I'm sure you've heard of. These guys are like really, really good at generating a ton of content from a small kind of, I'll call it like a small project. So Gary Vee calls it like the reverse pyramid. BuzzFeed just calls it the BuzzFeed model. But what they do is they'll generate like a long form article, something like what Casey's team generates for some of their clients. And then they will cut that up and use that research or use that project for like weeks and weeks and weeks, sometimes months. And whereas what happens is it looks like it's fresh, it looks like it's new. Like Gary Vee will give a keynote address, at South by Southwest. It's like a 20-minute address. He uses clips from that content for weeks afterwards. It's kind of this long tail of distribution, not of the whole thing all at once, because nobody wants to sit and watch the full 20 minutes unless, actually, I probably would, but a lot of people don't have the time to do that. So he generates this long tail of content. Now, I call it the hub and spoke, and we'll get into that in a minute. But Casey, is this like a model that's familiar to you? Does it resonate with kind of your intuition about how to like maximize the value of research or whatever it is that you've built, that you've done, an article, a research study, et cetera?
Absolutely. Yeah. Everything that we do sort of follows this. And early on, most of the research we did was for lead gen purposes. So they'd be, the final deliverable would be a PDF document of some kind that would live behind an opt-in landing page. And just like you said, just creating that and saying, hey, there's a lot of great stuff behind this landing page, enter your email to find out what it all is. That did not work nearly as well as dripping out all of those different findings, those different insights into their own specific articles that then linked back to that landing page. Or maybe it was public facing. There's an argument you can make there as well, very easily. And there's a lot of different ways to slice and dice it, but we found that just having it in one place only is really not the best way to get it shared and get the most impact out of it.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly my experience. I saw too many presentations with some of the teams that I worked with where they went through the whole entire thing with their investors, with their stakeholders. And like something that might have been extremely valuable and extremely easy for the decision makers to implement was presented early in the presentation. After you're like 40 slides in, that's forgotten. Like focus on that one thing, but we'll get into exactly how to do that with your insights specifically. So I've taken this model, this Gary Vee, BuzzFeed kind of model, and created the same thing specifically for insights. So we're going to walk through step by step how to do that. So it's called a hub and spoke. Like I said, hub is of course the center. The spokes kind of come off of the center. The hub in this case, so when you're thinking about your insights, is just your traditional long form, like key findings plus supporting evidence report. This might be a PowerPoint. It might be something you put in Tableau. It might be something you leave in, like in Question Pro, we have some pretty rich dashboards and you can like generate a whole bunch of different kinds of them. You might just leave it in there and that might be in your mind, like your kind of your flagship report, your hub. This is the way I talk about this is it should be something that there's no deeper level you can get to. Like this is everything that you have as a researcher, as an insights professional about the study that you did. This is everything. And again, like I said, the PowerPoints can be like 40, 50, 60 slides long. I definitely generated a bunch of PowerPoints of that weight when I worked in an agency way back in the day. What we did is we had like a key findings and summary slides at the beginning, which is pretty much where everybody dropped off or they read that and that was it. But this is kind of your hub. You have to have like this pillar kind of core piece of content. Gary Vee says the same thing. Like if you want to maximize like the efficiency of one piece of research and how much you can share over the following weeks and months, kind of the bigger and more comprehensive this hub report, this pillar piece of content is, the better. So again, like I said, this is something you might leave in your survey platform dashboard. It might be a PowerPoint. It might be like I've seen people generate Word docs that, they get pretty long, they're pretty hefty, but it's very detailed. It's the kind of thing that if somebody sees, one of the pieces of research or the snapshots, which I'm going to show you next, and they're like, hey, that's really interesting. But I'm not really sure I trust this or I'm not sure I understand what's being said or I want to learn more about this because this is extremely relevant to a decision I have to make next week. They can go back and look at this, but this is where everything comes from. So I know, Casey, we were just talking about somebody asked your team, like where the data came from or how the data was created or gathered. This is kind of where I would point somebody like that. Does this kind of make sense? Is this something you guys think about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's just one level of nuance I might add to this hub where, I think it's great that you have everything in this one place. If you're presenting this to your leadership or if you're presenting this to, an audience of some kind, I don't know that I would lead with this. And I know you're going to get into kind of different ways and stories to amplify the message. But what we typically do, we'll take all of this data and create a it's a bit like an executive summary maybe. So we might
Hmm.
take the top 3 points here, and maybe there's say 9 data points that really jump out. That's perfect when I see that, and potentially group them into 3 groups of 3, and you have about 9 really big meaty things for folks to think about, and then some hypotheses about what that data means. That to me feels like a very good kind of summary of what's all going on. If I can get the data to fit into that, a framework similar to that, and then if they want to drill down, they can get into all the nuances of where that data came from, and then that also can branch out into other spokes, which I know you're going to be speaking about here in a second.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really good point. You definitely don't actually lead with this. It's the first thing in the presentation. This is, like I said, if somebody sees something else that you've shared that's related and they're like, I need to learn more, or just maybe they didn't know there is more, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, you guys have done a lot of work on this subject. But yeah, that's 100% right. This is not something you throw out at the beginning. It's actually in reverse. So the
And
next kind of step, the
that's
next.
real quick, just on that point. I think that's like the biggest challenge here is to avoid that what I call, or I've heard of described as like a blizzard of data, where
Mhm.
we do all this research, we're so excited about it, we made it look great, and we throw out these 60, 70 slides or whatever it might be. Somebody just takes a look at that and is like, wow, I got it, there's no way I can digest this, and they're on to the
Yeah.
next thing. So that's, I think, if you take one thing away, it's like, try to avoid that blizzard of data, have it all ready at some place to find, but lead with something more strategic than that.
Yes, 100%, 100%. And that leads us right into this next point, which is the first spoke of this model. I call it snapshots. You can call it whatever you want. I think this is a pretty good word because it's descriptive about what this is. So this would be taking just one single piece of highly relevant information generated by your study, one key finding, not a key finding plus a big long paragraph. We're going to get into that, but this is a snapshot. It's one key finding, ideally like 1 or 2 sentences, focused, concise, specific. And we have a platform at Question Pro. It's called Insights Hub, which I run, and it generates these, and it looks like this. It does this more or less automatically. I mean, you get to pick the image, you pick which key finding you want to share. But I see our users share this on Slack, on LinkedIn. They'll share it like on Twitter or whatever, and people see this. And like the point is that, number one, it has the project name at the bottom. So like, you don't want people just to see this, say, hey, wow, interesting, then move on. The point is like, okay, let's say you share it on your internal Slack. You've wrapped up a study. You're the insights team. You're working like in the back corner office with your analysts. Everyone kind of wonders what you're doing all the time. You could send out these big reports, but as Casey said, it's just like a blizzard of data. When you send out something like this, like say you wrapped up your report and this is like the first key finding, put this into one singular nugget, just like this, or snapshot, and start sharing this out with your team, with decision makers, places where people will see it. If you're sharing this data for like mass consumption, same deal. Like, you take your hub, you take something from that hub, you pull out something extremely relevant and concise. I mean, this is what editors do when they title articles, when they make call outs, out of pieces to kind of break up the text. But it probably does seem obvious to someone like you, Casey, like you have to kind of lead with these hooks. But insights teams, because I work with so many, it's not always so obvious to somebody that loves digging in the data, loves to present like the full case, behind this statement to show how they did it, because it's sometimes pretty amazing, like the work that's done in order to generate a key finding like this. But like the consumers of your research are probably not analysts, or else they'd be on your team. They're decision makers, they're marketers. And so I call these snapshots, we used to call them kind of nuggets. They're built into the platform that we have for teams to help share their insights. But Casey, is this, again, something that do you guys help your clients share stuff like this? Do they pull out their own call outs? Do you see that work for them as far as driving people, in as inbound leads or as traffic?
Yeah, we definitely do. It works differently depending on who we're working with, but we'll at least consult on what we think these should be, if not write them completely. And I think it's a little bit deceptive because these are the shortest amount of copy, but these might take a lot longer to create than even a long form, article, to get this right, and kind of
Mhm.
summarize it in the most pithy, grabbing yet accurate statement possible. Boiling all that down can take a lot of time, and it's like you said, like any content marketer will tell you that the headline is, 80% of the article. The
Yeah.
success of the article is going to happen with the headline. That's the same thing here. And this, this may be the last thing that you create. You may start with that blizzard of data, the full report. You might craft, the long form versions of it, and then slowly distill it down to, the handful of the really, actionable or, exciting findings here.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, headline. I mean, you could think of it as a headline as well. If you're an editor, if you have experience in content, these are headlines. This is kind of a way to lure people in to read your content. And again, in our platform, it lists the name of the project there underneath the key finding. And that's, again, for the purpose, you think of it as a link. Like if your organization uses Insights Hub like this, anybody at your org can look at the name of that project, go search for it, and find everything else related to it, including the Hub kind of pillar content report. So the next spoke here I call stories. This is a little more insight specific. Casey, I'm not sure you guys have like something between kind of your kind of longest form piece and these snapshots, but for the purposes of insights, these are like between 400 and 600 words, and they are for a little bit more detail. Ideally, they link to the report. So like with an actual link, not just the name of the project. So those snapshot cards I showed you before back on this other slide, like it shows you the name of the project, but this is an image file. It's something to share, throw around all over the place. You can't click on it per se and get to a report. A story should include links or references to the studies that are informing the claims you're making. And then these things can double as blog posts. So I've seen teams that work with Question Pro generate stuff like this. They send it to their marketing team. They say, hey, this is a 400-page kind of analysis of research that we just did. It was for the product team to help them kind of brand a new product or rebrand a product. But we learned a lot about kind of, this whole space and how it relates to like, Gen Z or something like that. Here's a story, and it turns into a blog post. It links back to your research. You're able to showcase to decision makers, not just a story, but like where this came from. So this animation is just kind of what it looks like on Insights Hub. You could generate these wherever you'd like, however you'd like. Teams will use Medium or Notion. Those aren't as integrated with the reports themselves, which I'll get into in the next slide. But the idea here is to generate something that, as a researcher, probably you are capable of writing at least like 400 words in good narrative about, something that's like Casey said, it's like pithy, it's relevant, not getting too much into the nitty gritty of, like the conjoint study that you did, it was 1,482 respondents, 81% completion rate. Leave that out of these, but it's a bit more of a sophisticated thing to share with your teams than just the snapshots. So this is the kind of thing where you could ostensibly generate like 15 or 16 of these from the kind of big research studies I'm talking about. Run segmentation. So if you did a study on, like market or brand awareness for like the top 10 brands in your space, and some of them happen to be, really well-known kind of popular brands, they're going to catch the eye. Cut the data, look at males versus females, write a story about how males perceive these brands, and then how females. Cut it by age, how, boomers perceive this brand versus Gen Z. And these are kind of short things you can share around. Again, Casey, I don't know if this might be kind of sitting between, this might be really insight specific, but is this concept something that you've kind of seen? Do people take your longer form pieces and like cut it down into something like to share on LinkedIn, maybe as a post?
Yeah, we do a lot of this. We would consider this, we loosely title it just a short form blog post would be our, vernacular. And oftentimes we'll use this if we get all of our research back. And like I said, we find that, that main, 9 points or whatever it is that we feel like is really the meat of the story. Maybe there's a few data points that just don't fit into that neatly, but are still really interesting. Those are for sure candidates for these stories or these short form blog posts. And then additionally, if there are, maybe depending on what we're hired to do, if we can't fit all of what we want to say about one of those, main data points into the structure that or the format that we've been contracted to create, we might blow that out into a separate short form piece like this. It can connect a lot of dots, I think, between the raw data and the different delivery mechanisms.
Yeah, exactly. One thing I'll also add is you don't necessarily, and this comes from Gary Vee, he's like, you don't have to say, this is a story that we made from the report that we did a few months ago. I mean, you should reference the report, but it's like for all your audience knows, you're generating all this research every day. Like what they should see from you is like, hey, every day it's value, every day it's something new, every day it's new finding about this market or that market. It's like, oh, by the way, little do they know, this is a research study you did and it's done and it's been done for 2 months. It's just that, the data is available to them in the hub report, because it's saved wherever you save your data. But like it can be fresh, it can be new, and you can pitch it that way in order to stay relevant, in order to make sure, again, that decision makers, stakeholders understand and see the value you're providing, a lot of which can just get buried in those big reports. So the more of this they see, the better. Sometimes at Question Pro, I like to share things just to kind of keep top of mind about my product, Insights Hub. If I was on an Insights team, I'd share this stuff with marketing all the time. You have like a general Slack channel, say, hey, we just learned this today. It's relevant. I know it's relevant to marketing. I know it's relevant to products. I'm just going to share it. Say, hey, this is from the Insights team. This is from my team. Just to really make the case for what it is you guys are doing day in and day out. And kind of the last spoke in this model, and this is definitely unique to Insights, although I think Casey might have some thoughts here just based on experience, people asking questions about a study, is project operations. So like I said, the hub, or kind of pillar piece of content, is your full analysis of all the data. So you don't have to go back and reanalyze it every time someone has a question. You have it all ready to go. I think every Insights teams pretty much is generating something like that. Every time they do a study. Project ops, so here's why. You hear the phrase, facts don't care about feelings. But the fact is, decision makers' feelings don't often care about the facts either. People are going to have questions, not just about like the data or the findings, but the first questions usually the first questions I would see my clients get in a pitch to investors especially was like, when was this study done? How was it done? And like, who were the respondents? So that might be something you include in your kind of full analysis hub report, but also might not, because you're focusing on the insights. This is about like where you fielded the survey, what the questionnaire looked like. If someone wants to go through and click through the questionnaire themselves, which I've had an investor do, which is like a really scary feeling, because they find one problem and they get all, think the whole thing's just a bunch of bunk, which it's not. But if they want to see that, they need to be able to see that. At the end of a presentation to investors, I can often tell, I just see looks on faces, and like I can tell the first thing they're going to do is like they're going to go back and think about this study. Like the study promises that the market for this product, is like 14 million people in the US or something like that. You might present all the data to show it. If they're skeptical, they want to see what was done. And so in Insights Hub specifically, we've built project ops into a project profile. So you link your project to the actual instrument that was used to gather that data. So someone can go to that profile, look at the survey itself, and take it for themselves. They can see exactly who worked on this project. That's automatically logged in Insights Hub. Not every platform will do that. Some will, some won't. So they can see who did this, who launched the survey, who closed the survey, exactly when they launched it and exactly when they closed it, exactly when they generated these key findings. So it's just like full transparency into your project operations, who worked on it, and how it was accomplished. So there probably is some overlap here between this and your hub or your kind of pillar report. But this is a little bit deeper and more because of, like I said, how much data is being gathered. It's just ubiquitous. There's a lot of providers out there that are not offering good data. This allows anybody to log in and see. If you're doing good work as an Insights team, there's no problem with allowing people to see behind the scenes of everything that you're doing. I think offering that kind of visibility to stakeholders and decision makers is pretty impressive. It's not something a lot of other teams are doing. Apps like Insights Hub make this easier. So anyways, any thoughts on that, Casey? I know you guys aren't the ones necessarily. I worked with you. You create a lot of these surveys, but as far as like getting them out in front of people's eyeballs, taking the questionnaire, et cetera, I'm not sure how much that overlaps with your guys' workflow, but just what do you think about that?
Well, it's critical, especially when it comes to doing, PR releases around these findings. As you and I have had a little back and forth, we're currently kind of discussing this with some of the Washington Posts, and they're making us, validate where we got all of our data, which is fantastic. I'm glad they're doing that. But having, being able to point directly to, how it was gathered and the methodology is critical. And then even in the delivery of the information, oftentimes we'll have the kind of the true core methodology at the bottom, kind of hyperlinked or in some way, findable. But even in, the beginning paragraph, you might want to add, or however you're delivering this, kind of talk a little bit about the data integrity and address that issue
Mhm.
kind of head on, because it's in the back of everybody's mind now more than ever.
Yeah, especially internally too. Like if you're sharing this with decision makers, with marketing, with product, with an app like this, you can link back to this. Like the hyperlink is to this project profile, and that's what your team is using, and they'll know that. Like you communicate that. Your executive, marketing executive, is able to view the project as you viewed it, to see everything from the questionnaire, which platform you used, how many people took the survey, who opened it, who closed it, and then maybe talk to some of those people about some of the findings. But yeah, so this is kind of a spoke that I think is pretty insight specific. Like the Gary V model, the BuzzFeed model doesn't necessarily link back to Gary V doesn't link to his like lecture notes, but that's what this is. These are your notes. So this is kind of like maximum transparency. Again, for the purposes, at least in part, of making sure that your team, that your brand, your organization is aware of all the work your team is doing. Because like I said, I see so many insights teams producing so much good data, so many good insights, and so much of it gets lost. And unfortunately, when it comes time to times are tough, it's like which teams aren't generating so much value. It's like if only they knew what this insights team was doing every single day. There's absolutely no reason anywhere why you would not want that team with you, even when times are tough, even when the market's kind of shaken up. So I think this is a really valuable step. Full transparency like that makes execs, decision makers really trust the whole process. There's nothing they don't or won't be able to investigate or understand for themselves about the way your insights team is working. So again, one research project, 3 distribution tools, ideally generating a long tail of relevant content, sharing snippets, snapshots, nuggets from reports for weeks after the report is done, using those to lure people in, giving people interesting things to read on the blog, on their lunch break, to share on LinkedIn that come from research or a study that you've done. So that's what this is about. And again, these teams, research teams, please, you have to be your own biggest advocate in this world, in this economy that we're in now. You have to be the one making the case for the research that you're doing. I promise you, marketing is busy with selling. Product is busy with innovation, using the things that you're generating. Nobody's going to help you maximize kind of the visibility and exposure of the insights that you're generating. That's on you, and you have to become a storyteller. I hope that this model, I know because I've seen it work with teams, will help you to do that in kind of a systematic way. I know insight teams are all about these systems, protocols, getting things done efficiently. Using an app like Insights Hub isn't necessary. I think it helps a lot. That's why we built it. These 3 spokes are built into that app. We see teams use this very effectively, but even if you don't have one, coming up with a model like this that works for you, a workflow that ensures when research is done, that it is actually shared like to the max every single time, it's going to change the way your organization, your decision makers think about the value you provide to your brand. So again, this only works if you share your insights enthusiastically. Don't just send a report attached to an email. Put this report everywhere, share it, make sure you link back to the profile, make sure you link back to the stories, share the snapshots, put them up, if you're not working from home, which a lot of us are, put them up all over the place so that people see and understand like, hey, we only know this because my team generated all these insights that you guys are using each and every day. So that is it as far as the presentation goes. We're around for questions. I think I can see some of them. We might have some, I think, that were asked already that are not in the comment feed. So let me check here. I'm not seeing any on our comment feed. Maybe if Danielle, if you're around, you could put some there, or let me know what's being asked here. Oops. Here we go. All right, so some Q&A, things that were already presented to our team. I'm going to stop sharing the screen here. So first question I'm seeing about specifically coming to conclusions based on sample survey data, helping people come to their own conclusions. So that's kind of always a balancing act with insights teams. Is you present data. And Casey, this is really kind of inside baseball to insights. You don't necessarily want to bias the way people think about it. So you present findings. You don't necessarily present like, this is what we should do. The idea is you present information in a way that makes it easy for executives or decision makers to know what to do because of what you presented. So it's a balancing act. The snapshots, ideally, you're sharing data. You're sharing snippets of data, like the one I had on the presentation says, like 41% of teens have a credit card and make purchases every day, something like that. Not saying, we need to sell our product to teens. So it's a balancing act for insights. Definitely kind of err on the side of sharing data, of sharing things that people can use to inform the decisions that they're making when you share these snapshots, when you share these stories. There's another question here on the screen. Are there any action standards from sensory test data? Let me see here. That's a tough question. Which liking a score that product can satisfy consumers' needs and launch successfully? That's more of a insight specific question, not so much about distribution. It does kind of get back to what I was just saying about kind of balancing what you're sharing, sharing opinions or like action items versus sharing your insights and your data. So I think that's going to be pretty specific to brand or to product. Another question here: how to use data to influence executives into actionable steps? That's what we've covered here. So I think that, if you kind of know, it's good to sit in on some of those discussions as an insights professional. Like, what are decision makers thinking about? Like, is, increasing the price, is that something that, that they've been thinking about for a while, and they're looking at other firms, other similar competitors, et cetera. Present whatever findings you have that you might not have done a study on that because they might not have asked you for that yet, but you might have something that can help kind of shape their thinking around that topic. You might have some data on like people's willingness to pay, for your product, and you survey you fielded 6 months ago, and it gives decision makers something to start with. So just kind of stay in tune with some of those discussions that are happening among decision makers, and share data, strategically. If you think there's definitely a gap in your pricing study or your pricing research, share snapshots that you think are relevant to that, just to kind of get the ball rolling on some of those topics.
And that's something we think a lot about when we're trying to make everything we create as helpful as possible. That's one lens. Before we publish anything, we'd say, hey, is there any way to make this more helpful? And oftentimes adding some action items is great, but we found that being a little bit more, hypothetical about those action items. So in your pricing example, the action item might be consider testing, raising the prices. Our research
Mm-hmm.
shows that it could tolerate X amount, rather than crank those prices up immediately. And
Yes.
if they take that action item and for some reason there was some flaw in the data, that could be troublesome. But, just having kind of a tentative, next steps for exploring, potential action items that the data might yield. And also just getting multiple people's take on what each data point means, like, hey, this, X amount of people said no. What do we think about, that? And because just internally, our staff does that. And we all have wildly different, interpretations of what that data means. And that, I guess, would lead directly into the action items there too. So a little more into the interpretation piece.
Yeah, exactly. Another good question here. It's not actually on the screen, but how best to present research results to senior management who are not numbers people? So that's a good question. Your snapshots don't have to share numbers on them. Your stories don't have to be numbers heavy. You can say most teens really think this way. Now, I think most execs are probably going to want to see what those figures are, but they don't have to lead with numbers. I think probably, I know that it can be pretty concise to kind of lead with a percentage. And if the percentage is like, wow, that's really surprising, maybe it's effective. If it's kind of what people expect, probably not something to lead with. So Casey, what are your thoughts on like, how numbers heavy should some of this kind of more like consumable, insights narrative be? Is it, do you share tables in your blog post with crosstabs? Do you kind of use adjectives that describe 90%? It's like the vast majority. How does that typically go?
We would simplify it down for most of what we do into those, those snapshots, those headlines, working very hard to make that, as pithy and powerful and accurate as possible. And again, that's sometimes the last thing that we do after we've really spent a lot of time with the data, creating the executive summary, that's that initial statement, and just having like maybe 2 or 3 of those that you present, not even 5 or 6.
Yeah.
I think is too much, but just really focus on, you really only have, everyone's attention span is maxed out, and these leaders are, even more. So thinking about them where you really only have half their attention, even if it seems like you have more,
for minutes,
what
maybe.
what 2 or 3 things can you say to like try to get their full attention and then have a deeper conversation, rather than hitting them with all this stuff you're so excited about, initially can be a little bit shocking and not as effective.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. There's another good question from Julie Gray, which is, how do you best inspire leadership teams to consider changes when when the data does not paint the rosy picture they hoped it would? So this is tough, because I have worked with teams that the exec, decision makers, whoever it is, if the data does not support their priors or support their intuitions, sometimes they just they don't like the project, and it doesn't necessarily reflect well on the insights team. And so it could be tempting to be like, look, we definitely do need to increase prices like everyone else is doing it. We've done studies with our current customers and they're willing to pay more. But the decision maker absolutely does not want to do that. So it can be tempting to just kind of not lead with that. I think when you have this kind of distribution system set up and it's working, it's a lot easier to kind of share those things with everybody, kind of regardless of what they say. The more trust you can build with not just that one decision maker who is really skeptical about what you're saying, but with everybody. It's like, if this is a good study, and if other people notice that and they respect the work that your team is doing, it becomes easier to present just whatever it is that you found to somebody that might be skeptical. But it's tough. I mean, again, insights teams, you report to somebody. Your concern should be about your brand. I promise that's the longest term play, is to really focus on adding value to your brand, not telling people what they want to hear. But this is always, I think, it's kind of an evergreen issue a lot of insights teams will always face. Data doesn't always tell the story you hoped it would.
We tackle this, any project we go into there, as much as I try to convince my clients to not have a preconceived idea of what the study's going to end up saying. Everyone kind of goes in with a hope that validates their business case and drives a lot of traffic and business. And the way that this may or may not apply to every situation, but if we can go really broad with the topic, so maybe the core of what they were hoping the data would reveal is not what it comes back saying. Maybe there's a few other things where we went kind of broad and found some other interesting angles that we could discuss and use as well. That way it's not sort of, because sometimes they'll just have all these questions about basically the same thing. I say, let's really try to broaden this up in case that one thing is not, nobody cares about it or whatever. So that may be one way when you're designing the survey to protect a little bit against that. Of course, there's no way of getting around if it really, unvalidates what the leadership is, the direction they're taking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally. Another question here. I think I'll take 2 more. See, so someone asked specifically about Insights Hub. How do you leverage Insights Hub across many clients with both client-specific insights and broader sector franchising insights? So that's from Eric Stites, it looks like. The question is from him. So Insights Hub has what we call an agency edition. So if you want to separate kind of those 2 things, like broader insights versus hubs or Insights Hub kind of instances for specific customers or clients of yours, let's say you run an agency, we have an edition where you're able to kind of section off, we completely section off data for one client from the data that you're generating, your insights you're generating for another client. So it's called our agency edition. It's a pretty cool tool. I think it's built for agencies, but there's other use cases as well. But the idea is basically you manage a whole bunch of different hubs at one time. I know there are data security concerns with keeping, different clients' data inside the same system, et cetera. So we solved that problem. It's a little detail, but I'm happy to follow up afterwards about that. Let me see if there's any more good question here. I saw one more great question. So what are the best practices to organize data in order to present them effectively? Now, I'm going to again go back to Insights Hub with this. Insights Hub is built to make this possible, or not just possible, but you cannot add data to your Insights Hub without it being belonging to a project, without it having a timestamp, without there being an introduction about what the project is about. So we've seen a lot of teams have like a really unstructured it's kind of a chaotic shared drive situation for all of their data. Move all of that into Insights Hub to make it a lot easier to organize and find what it is you want to know. And then when it comes time to generate these stories, snapshots, you're not looking for this all the time. It's all in one place. So that's really what Insights Hub is for. So Insights Hub does also solve that problem. Happy to follow up afterwards about that. I think I need to do one more question just because we have a few more minutes here. I might change the wording of the question a little bit because I think it gets at a really good point. So let me see here. So the question was, we kind of addressed this. It says how to help people come to conclusions based on the sample survey, on the survey data. So we talked about having teams or sharing insights that aren't necessarily recommendations. Sometimes insights teams will do that. Sometimes they won't. But if you're trying to help people think correctly about a particular topic, because for example, I remember I worked with the client, this was years ago. They were kind of a global logistics shipping company. You've heard of them. Everyone's heard of them. There was a particular subject that we did a lot of research for them for about a year and a half. And we knew a lot about this whole topic. We had not met with them. It kept getting pushed. We were going to present at a board meeting. It didn't happen. We had not presented our full gamut of findings about this topic to them in 18 months, almost 18 months. And there was a lot that they needed to know, a lot that they weren't doing. Now we were an agency, so we were kind of, at their beck and call with this stuff. We had sent them the data. We hadn't had an opportunity to really kind of drive home what it is we had learned. And by that point, we did have recommendations just based on our relationship with them, based on the insights we had gathered from a lot of very broad surveys of the general population, which was their market. That situation is one where you be strategic about the kinds of findings you present at that point. At that point, you have meta studies. It's not just, hey, 41% of people said they would be interested in this last mile shipping service. It's across 8 surveys or across 8 studies, we've learned that this is a big in demand kind of product or in demand need that your specific customers already have. So just kind of build the case. A lot of that involves, like I said, pulling in project operations, pulling in methodology, and just kind of positioning yourself as a you call it an SME, as a subject matter expert on the topics where you really think that your input to decision makers is more than just, hey, these are the findings. It's like, hey, we're pretty confident across 8 studies that we've done, or however many you've done, that the best decision you can make here is to implement this product that product team developed 2 years ago that's still been kind of stuck in review or whatever. So just be really strategic about, like I said earlier in the presentation, own your work, stick up for yourself. A lot about your brand, probably, if you're working on an insights team, and promote that, share that. Don't shy away from being the biggest advocate of the work that your team is doing, of the work that you're doing, and also the biggest kind of data-driven voice at your brand, bringing to the table data-driven insights that nobody else has, that people need to see, want to see, whether they know it or not. So that's what this is all about, this hub and spoke model. We do have, and I think it's going to be shared in the comments, and we'll probably email it out later. I do have an ebook about this topic. It's very similar to this presentation, but it goes into more detail. It's the same hub and spoke model. So that's available on our website for free on Question Pro. I'm not sure the URL. It's going to be posted here, I think, in the comments, but download that. There it is. So it's questionpro.com/very long URL. Download it there. Take a look at it. This is everything that I went over just now with more detail. more screenshots, more like really specific how-tos, again, to turn this into a system, not something you have to sit down and figure out every time you do a study, but like, hey, how can we make sure every time this happens, every time we close a project, it gets pushed through this distribution funnel that makes it really, really easy to maximize for weeks and weeks, for months, the research that we spent months and months, building up. So anyways, thanks, Casey, for your time. Please let me know if you have any other questions. I'm always around LinkedIn. Reach out to Question Pro anywhere you want. So again, Casey, I appreciate it.
Thank you, Nick. It's been a blast.